Dust rose under a dying sun as the outlaw held the barrel steady, his eyes colder than the steel in his hand. She stood trembling, voice cracking, "Make it quick." But something in her tone stopped him. Maybe it was the way she didn't flinch. Maybe it was the way she looked at him, like she'd already seen death before. The cowboy's finger froze on the trigger. A heartbeat passed. Then his next words didn't enter life. They rewrote his own. "Don't forget to like and subscribe if you love Wild West stories." Dust burned in the back of Kane Mercer's throat as the sun sank low, bleeding its last light across the desert. His boots were half buried in the dirt, his breath slow, deliberate, the kind of rhythm a man learns when his heart forgot how to race. The revolver in his hand gleamed dull silver, a reflection of the woman's wide, tear-streaked eyes. She stood before him, torn dress fluttering like a dying bird, face pale yet resolute. Her lips trembled, but her voice didn't. "Make it quick." The words didn't plead, they commanded. For a moment, Kane thought he misheard her. Nobody ever asked him to hurry death before. The desert went silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Kane's finger tightened around the trigger, the motion instinctive, mechanical, what he'd done 100 times without a flicker of thought or conscience. But something in her tone struck a place long buried, a place it smothered under whiskey, violence, and years of riding alone. It wasn't fear that shimmered in her eyes, it was exhaustion, the kind that comes from losing more than life could ever give back. She didn't look at him like a monster. She looked at him like a man already dead. His jaw clenched. A drop of sweat rolled from his temple, tracing the scar that ran down his cheek like a crack in old leather. The trigger stopped moving. His pulse, steady as a drumbeat moments ago, stumbled. "Do it," she whispered, but softer this time, almost kind. A breeze stirred between them, lifting the dust, whispering secrets of the dying day. Kane blinked once, twice, and suddenly the weight in his hand didn't feel like justice or power. It felt like a burden. He saw flashes, faces of men he'd killed, the hollow eyes of a boy who once held his father's gun with pride, promising to protect, not destroy. His chest tightened, the memory clawing through the armor of indifference he'd built brick by brick. The sun dipped lower, the sky bruising purple and red, and he realized how quiet the world became when the killing stopped. His hand trembled. He lowered the revolver, the motion slow, deliberate, as though time itself resisted him. The woman's breath hitched, disbelief flickered across her face. He didn't speak. Words had lost their meaning long ago. He only met her gaze, and in it saw a mirror he couldn't stand to look into. The silence stretched, heavy, aching, eternal, until the last sliver of sunlight disappeared behind the horizon. Kane turned away, shoulders hunched, shadow long and fractured across the sand. The revolver hung loosely at his side, smoke curling from the barreled ghost. The woman didn't move, neither did he. Somewhere far off, a coyote cried, breaking the spell. The outlaw's boots shifted in the dirt, slow, reluctant, and he walked away into the dying light, leaving behind the one thing he'd never known how to face, mercy. The night pressed close around them, the last light of day dissolving into a bruise-colored horizon where the wind carried whispers of old sins. Kane Mercer stood still, revolver still heavy at his side, heart pounding with an unfamiliar ache that refused to fade. The woman before him straightened her back as if bracing against the weight of the silence. Her face was streaked with dirt, a small cut along her cheek glistening in the dim light, but her eyes, steady, unwavering, held no fear. "What's your name?" Kane's voice came out rough, like gravel dragged across rusted steel. She hesitated before answering, her tone calm, stripped bare of pretense. "Evelyn Hart." The name seemed to echo, soft yet immovable, a stone cast into still water. He could tell by the way she said it that it was all she had left to protect. She looked at him, chin high, defiant despite the tremor in her fingers. "You gonna do it or not?" she asked, voice cracking just slightly before she steadied it. "I told you, make it quick." Her words hung between them, daring him. Kane studied her, confusion crawling up his spine. He'd seen men twice her size fall to their knees begging, promising gold, forgiveness, even their souls. But this woman, standing alone in the desolate stretch of nowhere, offered him none of that. No tears, no bargains, only the quiet dignity of a person who'd already lost everything. He lowered his gaze to the dust around her boots. 2 sets of tracks, then chaos, the signs of struggle, maybe blood. The wagon raid. He could read the story written in the dirt better than words on paper. "You were with a train?" he asked. "We were heading west. Families. Children." Her voice faltered. "They came before dawn. Took the wagons, the supplies. Killed the rest." She swallowed hard, and in that pause, Kane heard the ghost of a scream carried on the wind. "You lost someone." It wasn't a question. Her lips trembled as she met his eyes. "Everyone." Then quieter, almost to herself, "My husband didn't even get to load his rifle." The words fell like stones into the dry earth. Kane exhaled through his teeth, guilt mixing with dust. "Why aren't you afraid?" The question escaped him before he could choke it back. Her gaze flicked up, fierce, unflinching. "Because there's nothing left to take." The sentence came out sharp, final, slicing through the desert hush like the crack of a whip. For a moment, Kane forgot how to breathe. The woman's voice, though calm, carried the echo of a heart long shattered, yet somehow still standing. The wind rose then, swirling dust between them, and he saw her silhouette blur into the dying twilight, fragile, unyielding, eternal. The sound of his revolver being holstered broke the stillness. She turned away, whispering something the wind carried off before he could catch it. In that instant, Kane realized he'd met someone braver than any man he'd ever known. And for the first time in years, the outlaw felt small beneath the sky. Kane turned his back to her, the revolver sliding into its worn holster with a sound that felt louder than thunder in the silence that followed. His boots pressed deep into the dust, each step dragging as if the earth itself wanted to hold him there, to make him face what he'd done and what he hadn't. The sun had sunk behind the ridge now, leaving the world painted in the fading bruises of twilight. The woman, Evelyn Hart, didn't move, didn't speak, didn't cry out for mercy or demand an explanation. She just watched him, the hollow of her gaze cutting into his back like a brand. Kane didn't know what made him stop. Maybe it was the way her stillness felt heavier than death itself, or maybe it was the quiet rustle of her torn dress in the wind, soft, human, alive. His throat tightened around something he didn't have a name for. He reached for his saddlebag, pulled out a half-filled canteen, its surface stained and streaked with sand. He didn't turn around. "Head north," he muttered, voice low and rasped raw from years of dust and smoke. "There's water by the ridge." The canteen hit the ground between them with a dull thud, rolling once before settling in the dirt. She didn't answer. The wind answered for her, lonely, endless, whispering over the bones of old travelers who never made it home. Kane took a breath, long and slow, and started walking again. The rhythm of his boots was uneven now, each step haunted by the sound of her silence. He'd walked away from towns in flames, from men bleeding out in the dirt, from every chance he ever had to be more than the thing he'd become. But this felt different. He could feel her eyes still on him, not with hate, not with fear, but with something else entirely. Something like understanding. It nudged him. Mercy wasn't in his blood. Mercy was weakness, and weakness got you killed out here. He told himself he should have finished it, should have done what he always did, end the paint quick and clean. But his hand had refused. His heart had betrayed him, and now the echo of that choice followed him into the growing dark. The stars began to pierce the horizon, cold and distant, while the desert swallowed all sound except for his fading footsteps. Behind him, Evelyn finally knelt, fingers brushing the canteen as if it were a relic from another life. Kane didn't look back. Couldn't. Each step forward felt like dragging his sense through molasses, heavy and clinging, refusing to let go. The air grew cooler, the night deeper, and still her image burned in his mind, those eyes that had seen too much and judged too little. He wondered if this was what redemption felt like. Not light, not peace, but a way that forced you to keep moving. Somewhere in the distance, a lone wolf cried to the moon, and Kane muttered to himself, should have made it quick. But the words tasted wrong, hollow. Because deep down, he already knew he couldn't. The desert night came down like a shroud, thick and endless, swallowing the horizon until only the fire remained, a trembling circle of light in a sea of black. Kane Mercer sat beside it, knees drawn up, his revolver resting on one thigh. glinting faintly beneath the flicker of the flames. The heat from the fire licked his scarred face, tracing old stories across skin that had forgotten tenderness. The air smelled of smoke, iron, and solitude. Somewhere far off, a coyote's cry echoed, a sound so lonely it might have been born from his own ribs. Cain stared into the fire until the shapes began to change. In the rolling tongues of flame, he saw eyes. Her eyes. Evelyn Hart's, steady, quiet, unafraid. The way they looked at him, not with hatred or horror, but with something far worse, pity. The memory cut deeper than any bullet wound. He had seen those same eyes before, different faces, different places, but always after pulling the trigger. A farmer on his knees begging for mercy, a boy who'd stolen food from the wrong man, a lawman whose badge caught the sun just before it fell into the dust. Cain tried to shake it off, but the ghosts were loud tonight. Every face he'd ever sent into the dark came back to stare from the edge of the firelight, silent, waiting. He rubbed his temples, hard, but they didn't fade. The whiskey in his flask burned sharp down his throat, but even that didn't wash them away. He hated nights like this, the quiet ones where his sins had room to breathe. His mother's voice, faint and far away, broke through the crackle of burning wood. Even a wolf can find his way home, if he remembers what the moon looks like. He froze. The words drifted through him like smoke through glass, fragile, haunting. He hadn't thought of her in years, not since the day he rode away from her porch, too proud, too angry, too lost. He looked up now, searching the heavens. The moon was a pale ghost behind a thin veil of clouds, its light dim but steady. For the first time, Cain wondered if there was still something left in him that could find its way back to that light, or if he was too far gone. He reached for his revolver, fingers curling around the grip until his knuckles whitened. It was the only thing in his life that ever felt certain, the only thing that spoke the same language he did, clean, cold, final. Yet tonight, even it seemed heavier, almost ashamed. He turned it slowly in his hand, watching the metal catch the firelight, imagining all the souls it had silenced. Sleep hovered near, but it wouldn't come. The past had made sure of that. The flames crackled louder, feeding on dry brush and regret. Cain exhaled, the sound caught between a sigh and a confession. Even a wolf, he whispered to the dark, needs somewhere to rest. But the desert gave no answer. The dawn broke pale and cold, the kind of light that didn't warm the skin but only reminded a man he was still alive. Cain Mercer rose from the ashes of his campfire, shoulders stiff, eyes red from a night without sleep. The desert stretched before him, endless and merciless, painted in grays and golds. His horse waited nearby, restless, sensing the unease that clung to him like smoke. Cain should have been heading south, toward the border, toward the life of shadows and whiskey that waited for men like him. But his boots turned north instead, toward the ridge, toward her. The footprints in the dust were faint, half swallowed by wind, small and desperate. Evelyn Hart had gone on foot. Foolish, maybe even suicidal. But she was moving, and somehow, that mattered. Cain followed, each step slow, deliberate, as though dragging the weight of his own redemption behind him. The sun climbed higher, burning his neck, drawing the last of his water. He didn't stop. The rhythm of his breath matched the beat of his guilt, steady, punishing. The further he went, the stronger the pull became. He told himself it was duty, maybe pity, but deep down he knew better. It was mercy that drove him. Mercy, and the echo of those eyes that had stared down his gun and refused to die. Nearer midday, he spotted a shape by the ridge, a crumpled form half hidden in the sand. His stomach twisted as he quickened his pace, the air growing hotter with every step. When he reached her, she was sprawled beside a rock, her skin flushed with fever, lips cracked and dry. Her hands were clawed weakly into the earth as if she'd been trying to crawl towards something that wasn't there. Cain dropped to one knee, brushing the dust from her face. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath, the words more prayer than curse. He pulled the canteen from his belt, half empty now, and lifted her head gently, pouring a trickle of water between her lips. At first, she didn't respond. Then her throat moved, slow, fragile. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then finding him. Confusion flashed across her face, followed by disbelief. Why? she whispered, the word barely formed, breaking apart in the dry air. Cain didn't answer. He didn't know how. He only stared at her, jaw tight, feeling something heavy shift inside his chest. The kind of ache a man gets when he realizes he's still capable of caring. He lifted her easily into his arms. She weighed little more than memory, and carried her to the shade of a boulder, laying her down with a gentleness that startled even him. The wind moved softly through the canyons, and for a moment, the desert seemed to breathe with him. Evelyn's hand twitched, brushing his sleeve, and he froze, the touch more piercing than any bullet. Her eyes closed again, sleep pulling her under. Cain sat beside her, revolver in his lap, watching the horizon blaze gold. For once, the silence didn't accuse him. It forgave. The afternoon heat settled thick around them, the kind of stillness that makes even the air seem to hold its breath. Cain Mercer sat beside the shade where Evelyn Hart lay sleeping, her breathing shallow but steady, her skin pale beneath the faint veil of dust. He'd done what he could, watered her lips, shaded her face with his hat, but there was no fixing the deeper things, the ones that hollowed out a person from the inside. The silence pressed on him like judgment, heavy and patient. He poked at the sand with a stick, tracing meaningless lines, as if the earth might hold an answer he'd never found in scripture or whiskey. The wind carried the scent of sage and ash, reminders of a life that always ended the same way, with something burning. "I killed a man once," he said suddenly, the words slipping out before he could stop them. His voice was low, cracked from disuse and confession. "Just to prove I could." He stopped, listening to the emptiness that followed, half expecting the desert to spit the words back at him. Nothing did. Only the faint rustle of Evelyn stirring in her sleep, her brow tightening as if she somehow heard him in her dreams. He swallowed hard. "Turns out, proving it never stopped the killing," he muttered. "Made it easier, though. Like breaking a wild horse. First time fights you. After that, it just don't." His thumb brushed the worn handle of his revolver. The weapon had been his only companion for years, loyal, cold, and cruel. Man I shot didn't even reach for his gun. Looked at me like he wanted to understand why. Cain stared out over the ridge, watching heat shimmer like ghosts. Never found an answer for him. Doubt I ever will. Behind him, the sound of movement, Evelyn's voice, soft, cracked, alive. "You don't need to tell me," she whispered. Her eyes were half open now, glinting amber in the thin sunlight, watching him not with pity or forgiveness, but something else, something steadier, older, understanding. It was worse than forgiveness because it stripped him bare, made him remember the man he used to be. "Maybe I do," he said, forcing a dry laugh that died in his throat. "Ain't nobody else out here to hear it but the dust." He looked at her again, saw the faint tremor of her lips as she breathed. There was no judgment in her gaze, only quiet, the kind of quiet that let a man hear his own soul scratching to get out. Cain rubbed his jaw, eyes falling to the dirt. "I've been running from ghosts for so long, I forgot what they sounded like." Evelyn blinked slowly, exhaustion pulling her eyelids down. "Maybe stop running," she murmured. Her words were soft, but they struck like bullets. He sat there long after she drifted back into sleep, staring at the fire he hadn't yet built, feeling something raw and unfamiliar crawl up through the cracks of his chest, something that almost felt like hope. The sound came low at first, a distant echo rolling over the sand like thunder with no rain behind it. Cain's head snapped up, instinct sharpening faster than breath. Another shot cracked the horizon, closer this time. Then another. The stillness of the desert shattered, and with it, whatever fragile piece he'd begun to build. He rose in one fluid motion, every nerve alive again, every scar remembering why it existed. His eyes narrowed toward the ridge. Dust plumed faintly in the distance, horses, 6, maybe 7 of them, moving fast. He didn't need to see their faces to know who they were. The Red Sons, his ghosts, wearing skin and spurs. The gang he'd once led through every blood-soaked mile of the frontier. Men who'd laughed under fire and buried their dead without names. Men he'd taught how to kill. Cain's hand drifted to his revolver, fingers tracing the steel like an old prayer. He could almost hear their voices, their crude jokes, their snarls, their hunger for chaos. The realization hit him with the force of a bullet. They weren't chasing coin this time. They were hunting. And the quarry was Evelyn Hart. He glanced toward her resting place beneath the boulder's shadow, her breathing light but steady, her body too frail for another escape. For the first time since he'd met her, fear flickered across his face, not for himself, but for her. "Damn it," he muttered, voice low, trembling with the rage of recognition. His horse stamped the dirt nervously, sensing the storm that was coming. Cain walked to the saddlebag, pulled out his rifle, checked the chamber, then his revolver. Slow, methodical, like a man dressing for his own funeral. He'd taught the Red Sons to be ruthless, efficient, unrelenting. Now he'd have to unteach them, with lead. He crouched low, scanning the terrain. The canyon narrowed just beyond the ridge, its walls jagged, perfect for an ambush. He knew every stone, every crevice. He'd hidden from the law there once, when he still believed the law was the enemy. He lifted his gaze back to Evelyn, sleeping still, unaware of the past galloping toward her. "Stay down," he whispered, though she couldn't hear him. The first rider appeared on the rise, a dark silhouette against the molten sky. Then another, their laughter faint but unmistakable, the kind of laughter that only men without conscience could manage. Cain's heartbeat slowed, steady as clockwork. He loaded one bullet at a time, the metallic click echoing like distant church bells. Each one a promise. "You taught him to kill," he murmured, voice rough. "Now teach him what dying feels like." The wind carried the scent of dust and gun oil. His eyes hardened, no longer the eyes of the man who'd spared a woman out of mercy, but of something older, colder, justice without a name. He knelt beside a rock, rifle raised, waiting for the riders to cross into the open. The Red Sons were coming, and for the first time, Cain Mercer wasn't running from the past. He was waiting for it. The morning broke thin and gray, the kind of dawn that carried no warmth, only a weary light that bled slowly over the land like a wound reluctant to heal. Cain Mercer stood beside his horse, fingers brushing the reins, eyes fixed on the canyon ahead. The air was still, too still, the silence before something sacred or damned. He looked once more toward the ridge where Evelyn lay sleeping beneath the tattered blanket he'd left her. She didn't stir, and he didn't call out. Some goodbyes weren't meant to be spoken. He swung into the saddle, the leather creaking under his weight, and turned the horse toward the narrow mouth of the canyon. The first hoofbeat struck the sand, hollow and sure, then another. Each one echoed between the stone walls like a confession whispered to a God who'd long stopped listening. He didn't pray, he'd forgotten how, but he thought about his mother's words again, the ones that had haunted him through every sin. Even a wolf can find his way home. Maybe this was the way. Maybe this was home. One last try through the darkness he'd built, to end it where it began. The wind shifted, bringing the smell of gunpowder and sweat. They were close. Cain dismounted, leading the horse behind a rock outcropping, and crouched low. He watched the entrance of the canyon shimmer in the early light, saw the Red Sons ride through, 7 of them, faces familiar, laughter sharp as broken glass. Men he'd bled with, stolen with, buried others beside. Cain took a breath, slow and even, and raised his rifle. The shot cracked like judgment. The first man fell from his saddle before the echo faded. The others scattered, shouting his name like a curse, like a memory they couldn't kill. Cain moved through the rocks like smoke, every step deliberate, every trigger pull and reckoning carved in gunfire. He didn't shoot to wound. He didn't shoot to brag. He shot to end. The sun climbed higher, painting the canyon in firelight, and the air filled with dust, screams, and the deafening rhythm of bullets meeting their mark. He caught glimpses of faces he remembered laughing by campfires long ago, now twisted in fear, eyes wide as they fell into the dirt they once ruled. By the time the last shot rang out, silence returned heavy as the sky. Cain stood alone, the revolver trembling in his grip, the barrel smoking, the chamber empty. His breath came ragged, his shirt dark with blood seeping from a wound beneath his ribs. Around him, the Red Sons lay still, 7 shadows returned to the earth. The canyon reeked of cordite and endings. Cain looked down at his revolver, then to the rising sun cresting the ridge, bright, blinding, merciful. His knees buckled, and he dropped to the sand, laughing once, softly, like a man surprised to still be breathing. Tears blurred his vision, carving clean lines down his dirt-streaked face. For the first time in years, the past didn't chase him. It was buried here, beneath the dust, under the sound of the last echoing shot. The desert was quiet again, that kind of hollow stillness that only follows when the violence has burned itself out. Smoke rose faintly from the canyon floor, curling into the dawn air, thin as ghosts leaving their graves. Evelyn Hart followed the trail of hoof prints and blood, her hands trembling around the reins of Cain's horse, which now carried her through the aftermath. The sun crept up over the ridge, spilling pale light across the sand, and for the first time, she saw them. Bodies strewn across the canyon like discarded memories, the remnants of something cruel finally ended. Her throat tightened, but she didn't weep. She only searched. Then she saw him. Cain Mercer lay slumped beside a jagged rock, his hat dipped forward, the earth beneath him soaked dark. For a moment, she thought he was gone. She slid from the horse, knees hitting the dirt as she crawled to him, the cold dread in her chest heavier than the morning air. "Cain," she whispered, barely audible. His eyelids flickered, and he exhaled a sound that was half a laugh, half a groan. "You came back," she said, voice shaking, relief breaking through the fear. He lifted his head slightly, blood streaking his chin, and managed a crooked smile. "Didn't think I knew how," he murmured, his tone dry but soft, as though the joke wasn't really a joke at all. Evelyn pressed her hand against the wound in his chest, feeling the heat in the slow, stubborn pulse beneath her palm. "Don't move," she said. "Ain't much danger of that," he rasped, eyes closing again. She tore a strip from her torn dress and wound it tight around the gash, her fingers steady even as her tears fell silently, darkening the fabric. The cloth bloomed red almost instantly, but she kept pressing, determined, whispering small prayers she didn't know she remembered. He didn't speak, didn't stop her, just watched her with that same quiet awe, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. The light shifted across the canyon walls, gold swallowing gray, warmth creeping in where only cold had lived. For a long while, neither of them said a word. There was no need. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was full, alive, like the pause before something begins. Evelyn leaned back against the rock beside him, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The wind brushed through her hair, catching the last chill of night as it gave way to day. "They're gone," she said finally, her voice little more than a breath. Cain nodded faintly, gaze distant. "All of them," he said. "Every last ghost." His words drifted off, carried by the wind, and for the first time since she'd met him, his face looked peaceful. The sun climbed higher, burning away the shadows, and the desert turned to gold around him. Evelyn's hand found his, fingers rough and trembling, but certain. For a moment, light touched everything, the rock, the sand, the blood, the two of them, and the world felt new again. The crackle of the fire was the first thing he heard, the soft, rhythmic whisper of burning wood, like the earth itself was breathing again. Cain Mercer blinked slowly, his vision swimming with light and color. The smell of smoke and dust filled his lungs, mixed with something faintly sweet, coffee, maybe, or the ghost of it. His body ached, heavy as lead, every muscle singing with pain. He tried to move, but the bandage across his chest hugged tight, reminding him of how close he'd come to the edge. Then he saw her. Evelyn Hart sat a few feet away, wrapped in a tattered blanket, the morning sun catching in her hair. She was staring east, past the fire, past the horizon, as if the light itself might hold an answer. Her posture was still, calm, but her fingers moved absently against her knee, tracing invisible shapes, lost in thought. Cain tried to speak, but the sound came out rough, more breath than word. She turned, and for a heartbeat, her face softened in relief. "You're awake," she said. "Didn't think you'd see another sunrise." He gave a small, crooked grin, the kind that barely lifted one corner of his mouth. "Didn't think I wanted to," he rasped. She tilted her head, studying him with that same quiet strength that had stopped his bullet days ago. The silence between them was deep but not cold, just full, heavy with everything that survived. Finally, she asked, "What now?" Her tone was even, but he heard the tremor under it, the fear of hope, fragile and untested. Cain looked past her, out toward the horizon. The desert stretched endless in gold, the kind of open that could bury a man or save him, depending on which way he rode. "Never thought about after," he said, voice low, almost ashamed. The words felt foreign, like he was confessing something sacred. Evelyn smiled faintly, the expression small but real, like the first light after a storm. "Then start now." The way she said it, soft, steady, cut through him sharper than any blade. It wasn't an order. It wasn't forgiveness. It was an invitation. He looked at her then, really looked, seeing the lines of exhaustion, the bruises fading along her arms, but also the strength burning beneath all of it. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was choosing. And somehow, that made him want to do the same. The fire popped between them, sparks spinning upward into the rising dawn. Kane's hand twitched near his revolver, out of habit, then fell still. For the first time, he realized he didn't need it. He leaned back against the rock, the pain in his ribs dull but distant now, replaced by something far more dangerous, peace. The light stretched further across the sand, reaching them both, painting the world in gold. Evelyn turned back to the sunrise, and he followed her gaze. No promises spoken, none needed. The road ahead was theirs to choose, and for the first time, Kane Mercer thought maybe it led somewhere worth finding. The wind carried the scent of ashen morning sage as Kane Mercer tightened the cinch on his saddle, his movements slow, deliberate, as though each gesture meant something more than it ever had before. The canyon behind them lay silent, a grave for ghosts and gunfire, where blood had mixed with dust and finally gone still. The rising sun painted the rocks in soft gold, washing over the land that had once known only red. Evelyn Hart stood a few paces ahead, adjusting the strap on her worn satchel, the faintest curve of determination in her posture. Her eyes were fixed eastward, where the horizon stretched open and limitless, promising nothing but distance, and maybe a beginning. "You ready?" she asked without turning, her voice steady but quiet, like she was afraid to break the fragile peace the dawn had brought. Kane finished his task, pulling the reins through his hand, feeling the leather slide against his palm. "Been ready a long time," he said, though the words came out rough, uncertain. Truth was, he didn't know what ready meant anymore. He swung up into the saddle, wincing slightly as his wound tugged beneath the bandage, but he made no sound. The pain was just a reminder, proof that he was still here, still breathing, still changing. Evelyn started walking, her horse's hooves crunching softly against the earth, each step measured, steady. Kane followed behind, a few paces back, watching her silhouette framed against the fire of the new sun. The light made her hair gleam like copper, and for a moment, she didn't look like the woman he'd met in the desert, broken, hunted, resigned. She looked like someone who decided to live, and maybe, without knowing it, she was teaching him how. The trail ahead curved toward the open plains, away from the jagged rocks that had trapped him for years in the echo of his own sins. The wind rose, carrying the last traces of smoke from the canyon and scattering them to the far edges of the sky. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Every life he'd taken, every wrong he'd buried, every piece of himself he thought was gone, it all stayed behind in that hollow stretch of stone. Ahead was something he didn't yet understand, but it didn't frighten him. The outlaw was gone. What rode now was a man learning the rhythm of grace, slow and steady, uncertain but unafraid. The sun climbed higher, spilling warmth across their backs, and for the first time, Kane didn't feel the weight of the gun at his hip. He felt the beat of the horse beneath him, the steady sound of two lives moving forward together. The desert widened into promise, the sky into forever. Evelyn glanced back once, just enough to catch his eyes. No words, just a faint smile. He tipped his hat, and they rode on, their shadows stretching long behind them, fading into the gold of morning. Two silhouettes, one past, one future, riding side by side into something that finally felt like peace. They said the wind carried the story first, whispered through the canyons, down the trails, and across the border towns where rumor was as good as scripture. A lone rider had taken down the Red Sons, every last one of them. 7 men who'd burned towns, stolen children, and carved their names into the bones of the frontier, gone overnight. Some claimed he was a ghost come for vengeance. Others swore he was one of their own turned righteous by blood and loss. No one knew the truth. All they knew was that by the time the lawman rode through the canyon, They found nothing but silence, dust, and a single revolver half buried near a pool of dried blood. No name, no body, just the echo of something that felt like judgment. Weeks passed, and the tale grew taller, as legends do. They said a woman was seen riding east, her eyes steady as the sunrise, a faint smile on her lips. And somewhere far north, where the hills softened into plains, travelers began to speak of a man who showed up when the cruel came. Help us tell more stories from the quiet frontier. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell. You'll be the first to know when the next chapter arrives.